A rich woman left a jacket at a diner. The poor mom who turned it in found something she wasn't supposed to. Autumn rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's Diner as Sarah Chun moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the checkered linoleum floor. The smell of coffee and grease hung heavy in the air, mixing with the distant sound of traffic from Route 9. At 32, Sarah had the kind of tired beauty that came from years of working multiple jobs, dark circles under her brown eyes, calloused hands that told stories of endless shifts, and a smile she forced for customers even when her feet screamed in protest. "Table 6 wants their check," called out Betty, the evening waitress, as she hurried past with a pot of coffee. "And that fancy lady in booth 7? She's been nursing that same cup of coffee for 2 hours, just staring out the window." Sarah glanced toward booth 7, where an elegantly dressed woman sat alone. Even from across the diner, Sarah could see the woman's designer handbag, the way her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the ceramic mug, and the expensive watch that caught the fluorescent lights. Everything about her screamed money, the kind of money Sarah had never known and probably never would. "Must be nice," Sarah muttered under her breath, thinking about the stack of overdue bills sitting on her kitchen table at home. The electric company had sent a final notice yesterday, and Emma's school had called about outstanding lunch fees. "Again? What's that, hon?" asked Mike, the night cook, as he emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "Nothing, Mike, just thinking out loud." Mike had been working at Murphy's for 15 years, and he'd seen plenty of waitresses come and go, but Sarah was different. She worked harder than anyone he'd ever met, pulling double shifts whenever she could, never complaining, even when difficult. Customers left her cleaning up their messes without a tip. "You know," Mike said, refilling Sarah's coffee cup, "you've been here 3 years now, working yourself to the bone. When's the last time you took a day off?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Day off? Mike, I can't afford a day off. Between this place, my cleaning job at the office building, and the weekend shifts at the grocery store, I barely make enough to keep the lights on. What about Emma's father? Doesn't he help out?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Marcus, he's too busy playing house with his new girlfriend to worry about child support. And now he's threatening to take Emma away from me, saying I can't provide for her properly." Her voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes I wonder if he's right." "Don't you dare think that," Mike said firmly. "Emma's lucky to have you. You're the strongest person I know." But Sarah didn't feel strong. She felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified that she might lose the only good thing in her life, her 8-year-old daughter. As the evening wore on, the diner slowly emptied. The truckers finished their meals and headed back to their rigs. The teenage couple sharing a milkshake finally left hand in hand, and the businessman who always ordered the same turkey sandwich packed up his laptop and disappeared into the night. By 10 p.m., only Sarah, Mike, and the mysterious woman in booth 7 remained. The woman had barely touched her food, a $12 steak dinner that Sarah knew represented almost an hour of her wages after taxes. Instead, she'd spent the evening making hushed phone calls, her voice too low for Sarah to hear the words, but high enough to catch the tension in her tone. "Excuse me," the woman called out suddenly, her voice carrying a slight accent that sounded expensive, like private schools and European vacations. "Could I get my check, please?" Sarah approached the table, notepad in hand. Up close, the woman was even more striking. Blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, skin that looked like it had never seen a day of hard work, and eyes the color of winter ice. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like fear. "Of course," Sarah said, tearing off the check. "That'll be $14.50. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a $50 bill, placing it on the table without counting the change. "Keep it," she said, sliding out of the booth. "And thank you for the quiet evening." I needed somewhere to think. Sarah stared at the $50 bill more than she usually made in tips during an entire shift. Ma'am, are you sure? This is a lot of money. The woman paused, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, her perfectly composed facade cracked, and Sarah saw something vulnerable underneath. Trust me, she said quietly. I won't miss it. The bell above the door chimed as the woman disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the echo of her high heels on the pavement. Sarah was still processing the generous tip when Mike called out from the kitchen. Sarah, you heading out? I can finish up here. Yeah, just let me clear booth 7 and… Sarah stopped mid-sentence. There, draped over the back of the booth where the woman had been sitting, was a cream-colored jacket. The fabric looked impossibly soft, and even in the harsh fluorescent light, Sarah could see the quality of the stitching, the way it fell in perfect lines. She forgot her jacket, Sarah called to Mike, lifting the garment carefully. It was heavier than she'd expected, and the label inside read, Giorgio Armani, in elegant script. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This jacket probably cost more than she made in 3 months. The rich lady? Mike asked, wiping down the grill with methodical precision. Yeah, I should probably call the police, turn it into lost and found or something. Or you could just keep it here until she comes back, Mike suggested. She paid with cash, but maybe she'll remember where she left it. Sarah nodded absently, but as she folded the jacket, her fingers brushed against something in the inner pocket. Something that crinkled like paper. Without thinking, she reached inside and felt her fingers close around what seemed to be an envelope. I'll just check if there's any ID, she said, more to herself than to Mike. But what Sarah pulled out of that pocket wasn't identification. It was something that made her stomach drop and her hands begin to shake. The envelope was thick, sealed, with red wax that had been broken and resealed. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing the elegant woman from the diner in contexts that made Sarah's blood run cold. There were pictures of her shaking hands with men Sarah recognized from the local news, men who'd been arrested 6 months ago in a major drug trafficking bust. There were photos of her entering and leaving buildings that Sarah knew were connected to organized crime, but the photographs were nothing compared to the documents. Underneath them, bank statements showing deposits of hundreds of thousands of dollars, all in the name of Victoria Ashford. Coded messages discussing shipments and product distribution. Handwritten notes detailing payments to various officials, including police officers, city council members, and judges. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through page after page of evidence. This wasn't just petty corruption. This was a massive money laundering operation with tentacles reaching into every level of local government. And then she saw it. A name that made her heart stop completely. Judge Patricia Holbrook. The same judge who would be presiding over Sarah's custody hearing next week. The same judge who had a reputation for being particularly harsh on single mothers, especially those struggling financially. The same judge who, according to the documents in Sarah's hands, had been receiving monthly payments of $10,000 for favorable considerations in family court cases. Sarah sank into the nearest booth. The documents spread out before her like a roadmap to hell. Everything suddenly made sense. Why Marcus had been so confident about the custody case. Why he'd been bragging to his friends about how he was going to take Emma away from that loser. Judge Holbrook had already made her decision, and it had nothing to do with what was best for Emma. Sarah, you okay over there? Mike's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into the envelope with shaking hands. I'm fine, just tired. But she wasn't fine. She was terrified, confused, and suddenly faced with a choice that could change everything. The right thing to do was obvious. Return the jacket to the police, turn over the evidence, and let the proper authorities handle it. But as Sarah looked around the diner, at the cracked vinyl booths held together with duct tape, at the ancient cash register that barely worked, at the job that paid her just enough to survive, but never enough to truly live, another voice whispered in her mind. This evidence could save Emma, not just from the rigged custody hearing, but from a life of poverty and struggle. With proof of Judge Holbrook's corruption, Sarah could expose the entire network. There would be investigations, arrests, and probably rewards for information leading to convictions. Enough money to finally give Emma everything she deserved: a safe neighborhood, good schools, clothes that worked from thrift stores, and a mother who didn't have to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. But it would mean using stolen evidence. It would mean crossing a line that Sarah had never crossed before, violating the trust of someone who had simply forgotten their jacket after a difficult evening. The woman, Victoria Ashford, was clearly involved in something terrible, but she was also clearly in some kind of trouble herself. The fear in her eyes, the way she'd clutched her phone during those hushed conversations, the desperate edge to her voice when she'd thanked Sarah for the quiet evening. It all suggested someone who was in over her head, not someone who was in control. Sarah thought about Emma, asleep at home in their tiny 1-bedroom apartment, trusting her mother to protect her from the world. She thought about the custody hearing, about the possibility of losing the only thing that mattered to her. She thought about Judge Holbrook sitting in her expensive robes, making decisions based on bribes rather than justice. The diner's clock chimed 11 times. And Sarah realized she'd been sitting there for almost an hour, staring at the envelope that contained enough evidence to destroy dozens of lives, including, possibly, her own. Sarah? Mike appeared beside the booth, his weathered face creased with concern. You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah looked up at him. Kind, reliable Mike, who'd been like a father to her since she'd started working at Murphy's. Mike, what would you do if you found something that could save your child, but using it meant doing something you'd never forgive yourself for? Mike slid into the booth across from her, his eyes serious. That's a hell of a question, Sarah. What kind of something are we talking about? Sarah glanced down at the envelope, then back at Mike's honest face. I can't tell you, not yet, but it's big and dangerous. And if I use it, I might save Emma, but I might also become the kind of person I never wanted to be. Mike was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. You know what I think? I think you're the kind of person who always does the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And I think Emma's lucky to have a mother who worries about her soul as much as she worries about paying the bills. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. But what if doing the right thing means losing her? Then you'll find another way. You always do. But as Sarah drove home through the empty streets, the envelope hidden in her purse like a loaded gun, she wasn't sure there was another way. The custody hearing was in 5 days. Judge Holbrook had already made her decision, and Emma's entire future hung in the balance. At home, Sarah checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in their shared bedroom, her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, I love you, baby, and I'm going to find a way to keep you safe. Then she sat at their tiny kitchen table and opened her laptop. She needed to research the names in the documents to understand exactly what she was dealing with. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah found herself surrounded by printed articles, handwritten notes, and the terrible knowledge that she was now in possession of evidence that could bring down a criminal empire. But she was also in possession of something else, the power to save her daughter, no matter what it cost her soul. The question was, how far was she willing to go? 3 days had passed since Sarah had discovered the envelope, and she hadn't slept more than a few hours total. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victoria Ashford's face, or Judge Holbrook's stern expression, or Emma's trusting smile. The weight of the decision was crushing her. But time was running out. Victoria Ashford sat in her penthouse office on the 32nd floor of the Ashford building, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she held her phone. The view of the city spread out below her, lights twinkling like stars, people going about their lives, oblivious to the empire of corruption that had made her wealthy beyond measure. "Mr. Castellano," she said into the phone, her voice carefully controlled despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I need to report a problem." The voice on the other end was cold, emotionless. "What kind of problem, Victoria?" "I lost something. Something important. Documents that could compromise our operations." There was a long silence. When Castellano spoke again, his voice carried the weight of barely contained violence. "What kind of documents?" Victoria closed her eyes, knowing that her next words might be signing her death warrant. "Bank records, photographs, communications, everything from the past 2 years." "Everything?" "Yes." Another silence, longer this time. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "Where did you lose them?" "A diner. Murphy's Diner on Route 9. I was there 3 nights ago, and I forgot my jacket." "The documents were in the inner pocket. And you're just telling me this now?" "I thought I could handle it quietly. I sent people to ask about the jacket, but the staff claims they don't have it. I think someone found it and kept it." "Then we have a problem, Victoria. A big problem." Victoria's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "What do you want me to do?" "You're going to fix this. Tonight. Find whoever has those documents and make sure they disappear. Along with the documents." "I can't." "You can and you will. Because if those documents surface, if our operation is exposed, you won't just lose your fortune, Victoria. You'll lose everything, including your life." The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at the phone with tears streaming down her face. She'd gotten into this mess trying to save her family's business after her husband's death, taking loans from the wrong people, making deals with the devil to keep her employees paid and her children in private school. Now she was trapped in a web of corruption that was about to destroy everything she'd tried to protect. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah sat in the courthouse bathroom, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She wore her only good dress, a navy blue number she'd bought at Goodwill for job interviews, and her hands shook as she applied lipstick with fingers that seemed to belong to someone else. The custody hearing was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to decide Emma's fate. 20 minutes to choose between justice and survival. The flash drive in her purse contained copies of every document from Victoria's envelope. Sarah had spent the previous night making copies, scanning photographs, and preparing a comprehensive dossier that would destroy Judge Holbrook's career and expose the entire corruption network. The original envelope remained hidden in her apartment, sealed in a plastic bag and tucked inside an old shoebox or insurance policy. But using the evidence would mean crossing a line she'd never crossed before. It would mean becoming someone she'd never wanted to be. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Emma's fine. Don't worry about us. Fight for your baby." The courtroom was exactly as Sarah had imagined. Wood paneling that had seen decades of broken families, fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, and the smell of old coffee and desperation. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with his expensive lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. Marcus looked confident, relaxed, like a man who knew the game was rigged in his favor. Judge Holbrook entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who'd never questioned her own authority. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to look right through the people whose lives she held in her hands. "The court will come to order," Judge Holbrook announced, her voice echoing in the small space. "We're here today to consider the petition of Marcus Chen for modification of custody arrangements regarding the minor child Emma Chun. Sarah's court-appointed attorney Jim Torres was a tired-looking man who carried himself like someone who'd lost more cases than he'd won. He'd spent exactly 15 minutes reviewing Sarah's file before the hearing, and his opening statement was weak, unfocused, and uninspiring. "Your Honor," he began, "my client Sarah Chun has been the primary caretaker for Emma since the divorce. While she may not have the financial resources of Mr. Chun, she provides a loving, stable home environment." Marcus's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, stood up with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case in Judge Holbrook's courtroom. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Ms. Chun is financially unstable, working multiple jobs that prevent her from providing adequate supervision for the child. Emma deserves better than a life of poverty and neglect." For the next hour, Sarah sat in silence as her life was dissected and judged. Marcus's lawyer presented evidence of Sarah's financial struggles, her overdue bills, her multiple jobs, the small apartment she shared with Emma. He painted a picture of a woman who was failing as a mother, who couldn't provide for her child's basic needs. Sarah's lawyer tried to counter with character witnesses Emma's teacher, who spoke about Sarah's involvement in her daughter's education, Mrs. Rodriguez, who testified about Sarah's devotion to Emma, Mike from the diner, who described Sarah's work ethic and integrity, but Sarah could see the writing on the wall. Judge Holbrook listened to the testimony with barely concealed impatience, her decision already made. When Marcus took the stand to describe his stable income, his new girlfriend's influence, and his plans for Emma's future, the judge nodded approvingly. "Mr. Chun," Judge Holbrook said, "it's clear that you're in a better position to provide for Emma's needs. Financial stability is a crucial factor in determining the best interests of the child." That's when Sarah stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom, "I have evidence that I believe is relevant to these proceedings." Judge Holbrook's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Chun, you're out of order. Please sit down. I have documentation showing that this court has been compromised by corruption, and that Emma's best interests are not being served by these proceedings." The courtroom erupted. Marcus's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting loudly. Jim Torres grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her back into her seat. But Sarah was beyond caring about protocol or consequences. "I have bank records showing that Judge Holbrook has been receiving monthly payments of $10,000 in exchange for favorable rulings in family court cases. I have photographs and communications proving that this entire system is corrupt." Judge Holbrook's face went white, then red. "Bailiff, remove Miss Chun from my courtroom immediately. She's in contempt of court. I have evidence of a money laundering operation involving dozens of officials, including members of law enforcement and the judiciary. Emma's future is being decided by someone who's been bought and paid for. Get her out of here." Judge Holbrook screamed, her composure completely shattered as the bailiff approached. Sarah pulled the flash drive from her purse and held it up. "This contains everything. Bank records, photographs, communications. The FBI will be very interested in what I found." The bailiff grabbed Sarah's arms, but she continued speaking as he dragged her toward the door. "Emma deserves justice, not a system that's been corrupted by criminals. And so do all the other children who've been hurt by these rigged proceedings." The courtroom doors slammed shut behind Sarah, but she could still hear the chaos inside Judge Holbrook shouting orders, Marcus's lawyer demanding explanations, Jim Torres trying to restore order. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a holding cell, the flash drive still in her purse. She'd been charged with contempt of court, but she'd also managed to get the attention of people who mattered. A FBI agent named Jennifer Walsh had already called, asking questions about the evidence Sarah claimed to have. "Miss Chun," Agent Walsh said when she arrived at the jail, "I understand you have information about judicial corruption." Sarah looked at the serious-faced woman across from her and made a decision. I have evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, bribery, and corruption at multiple levels of government. But I need something in return. What do you need? Protection for my daughter, and a guarantee that the custody case will be reheard by an uncompromised judge. Agent Walsh leaned forward. If your evidence is as comprehensive as you claim, we can make that happen. But you'll need to cooperate fully with our investigation. I will. But I need to know what happens to the woman who lost the jacket, Victoria Ashford. Agent Walsh's expression didn't change. That depends on how willing she is to cooperate. People who help us tend to fare better than those who don't. That evening, Sarah was released on her own recognizance. She picked up Emma from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment and held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Mommy, are you okay?" Mrs. Rodriguez said you had to go to court today. "I'm fine, baby, and you know what? I think everything's going to be okay." As Sarah tucked Emma into bed, she thought about the choice she'd made. She'd crossed a line, used stolen evidence to save her daughter. But she'd also exposed a system of corruption that had been hurting families for years. Maybe that was worth the price. At midnight, there was a soft knock at her door. Sarah peered through the peephole and saw Victoria Ashford, looking nothing like the composed woman from the diner. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her hands shook as she clutched a small purse. "Ms. Chun?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sarah opened the door, keeping the chain lock. Engaged. "I know who you are, Miss Ashford, and I know what you've done. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to ask for your help." "My help?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "They're going to kill me. The people I work for, they don't forgive. Mistakes, and losing those documents, it's a death sentence." Sarah studied the woman's face, seeing genuine terror there. "Why should I help you? You've been part of a system that corrupts justice, that hurts families." "Because I never wanted to be part of it. I got in over my head trying to save my family's business. And because I have information that could help you bring down the whole network." Sarah looked back toward Emma's bedroom, then at Victoria's desperate face. "What kind of information?" "Names, locations, financial records that make what you found look like pocket change. I can give you everything, but only if you help me disappear." "I can't. You can. You have connections with the FBI now. They could put me in witness protection. I could testify against everyone, bring down the entire operation." Sarah thought about the choice she'd made in the courtroom, about the line she'd already crossed. And what about Emma? What about my family? The FBI will protect you too. You're already a target. Using that evidence made you an enemy of some very dangerous people. As if summoned by her words, Sarah heard the sound of cars pulling up outside her building. Victoria heard it too, and her face went white. "They found me," she whispered. "Please, Miss Chen, I have children too. I never meant for any of this to happen." Sarah looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw not a criminal, but a woman who'd made terrible choices trying to protect the people she loved. Just like Sarah had done. "Come in," Sarah said, sliding off the chain lock. "But we do this quietly. Emma is sleeping." As Victoria stepped into the small apartment, Sarah realized that sometimes justice wasn't about punishment, it was about redemption. Sometimes the right choice wasn't the easy one, and sometimes saving one person meant saving yourself. The sound of footsteps in the hallway was getting closer, and Sarah knew that whatever happened next would determine not just her future and Emma's, but the fate of every family that had been hurt by the system they were about to expose. "Do you have your phone?" Sarah asked. Victoria nodded. "Call Agent Walsh. Tell her we're ready to make a deal." As Victoria dialed the number with shaking hands, Sarah went to check on Emma one more time. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, trusting her mother to keep her safe. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt like she might actually be able to do that. The real fight was just beginning, but Sarah was ready. She'd crossed the line between victim and survivor, between desperation and hope, and she was going to make sure that Emma grew up in a world where justice wasn't for sale.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.